It all started the day Peppa found a strange toy in her room. It was a Labubu, a small yellow monster with big black eyes and sharp teeth. Peppa couldn't remember where it came from. "What a cute toy! Where did you come from, little one?" she asked. Labubu remained silent, but his black eyes seemed to follow Peppa's every movement. That same day, a second window appeared in her room. The new window was old and dark, completely different from Peppa's usual window. Through the murky glass, instead of the familiar yard, there was a view of a gloomy, foggy forest. And strangest of all, in the forest grew trees that looked exactly like Labubu toys. "Mummy, look at this window and this strange forest," Peppa called out. But Mummy Pig replied, "Peppa dear, there's only one window in your room. And what's that toy you're holding?" Mummy couldn't see the second window, but even stranger, she couldn't see the Labubu toy either, even though Peppa was holding it right in front of her. On the first night, Peppa placed Labubu on her bedside table and went to sleep. But in the middle of the night, she woke up to a strange sound, the quiet grinding of teeth. In a quiet, creaky voice, Labubu whispered, "Peppa, Peppa, look out the window." You can talk," Peppa gasped. She turned to the second window. In the forest, she saw hundreds of small yellow figures, exactly like her toy. They stood between the trees, staring directly at her. Every night, the army of toy Labubus in the forest grew larger. They moved closer to the window, and their black eyes glowed in the darkness like little stars. "We've come for you, Peppa. You found us. Now we'll find you," Labubu said. "What do you want from me?" Peppa asked fearfully. "We want you to become one of us, forever," came the chilling reply. On the third night, Peppa woke up to find her hands had turned yellow, like Labubu's, and her eyes in the mirror seemed bigger and blacker than usual. "What's happening to me?" she cried. "You're becoming one of us. Soon you'll be able to live in our forest and we'll play forever," Labubu explained with a sinister smile. Peppa tried to throw away the Labubu toy, but it always returned to her room. She tried to close the second window, but it appeared on other walls. "Mummy! Daddy! Help me!" she screamed. But her parents couldn't see Labubu or hear his voice. To them, Peppa was just talking to herself. On the seventh night, the Labubu army came right up to the window. There were so many of them that the forest glowed with the yellow light of their bodies and the black gleam of their eyes. In chorus, they chanted, "It's time, Peppa. Time to join us." Peppa looked at herself in the mirror. Her skin had turned completely yellow. Her eyes were big and black, and the same horrifying smile as Labubu's appeared on her face. I'm ready," she said in a voice that now sounded like Labubu's. The second window opened by itself. Cold wind from the Labubu forest rushed into the room. Peppa, now looking more like a toy than a pig, stepped toward the window and disappeared into the night. In the morning, Mummy Pig came into Peppa's room to wake her up, but the bed was empty. On the windowsill lay only a small yellow Labubu toy with big black eyes. "Peppa, Peppa, where are you?" Mummy called out. She picked up the toy. For a moment, it seemed like Labubu winked at her and whispered quietly in a familiar voice, "I'm here, Mummy. I'll always be here." A week later, George found a strange toy in his room, a small yellow monster with big black eyes. And that same day, a second window appeared in his room. "Dinosaur! Dinosaur!" George exclaimed. "No, George, I'm Labubu, and soon you'll be Labubu too," the toy replied. In the forest beyond the window stood a figure that looked very much like Peppa, but with yellow skin and black eyes. She waved at George and smiled with Labubu's horrifying smile. Be careful with toys that appear out of nowhere. Sometimes they don't come to be played with, but to turn you into a toy. The Labubu toy Peppa found a strange toy in an old chest in the attic. a small figure with big dark eyes and a wide smile. It had a tag, Labubu. The toy was soft but cold to the touch, as if it had been kept in a freezer for a long time. "Can I take it to my room?" Peppa asked Mummy Pig. "Of course, dear. But wash it first, it's very dusty." Peppa took Labubu to her room and placed it on the shelf next to her other toys. The toy stared straight ahead with an unmoving gaze. Something about its smile seemed wrong, too wide for such a small face. At night, Peppa woke up to a strange sound, quiet rustling, as if someone was crawling on the floor. She turned on the nightlight and looked around the room. Everything was in its place, but Labubu had disappeared from the shelf. "Where is it?" Peppa muttered, getting out of bed. She found the toy under the bed, lying on its side. Strange! How could it have gotten there? Peppa picked up Labubu and put it back on the shelf. The toy seemed heavier than before, and its smile had become even wider. The next day, Peppa was playing with George in the living room. Suddenly, she heard the patter of little feet upstairs. "Mummy, someone's walking in my room," Peppa said. "There's no one there, dear. Maybe it's mice." But when Peppa went up to her room, Labubu was not on the shelf again. This time, it was standing in the middle of the room, turned toward the door. Its pose was as if it had been waiting for Peppa. "How did you get here?" Peppa whispered, carefully approaching the toy. Labubu was silent, but its eyes seemed to follow Peppa's every movement. The girl quickly grabbed the toy and put it back on the shelf, but this time turned it to face the wall. At night, the rustling repeated, but now it was louder. Peppa woke up and saw that Labubu was standing by her bed, looking straight at her. In the darkness, its eyes glowed with a faint greenish light. "What do you want from me?" Peppa whispered, not daring to move. The toy didn't answer, but slowly raised one hand, as if it wanted to touch Peppa. The girl screamed and turned on the light. Labubu instantly became an ordinary toy lying on the floor. "Mummy! Daddy! What happened?" asked Mummy Pig, running into the room. "Labubu! It was moving! It was standing by my bed! It's just a toy, dear. It can't move." But Peppa saw the truth in Labubu's dark eyes. The next day, she tried to throw the toy away, but it kept returning to her room. First in the trash can, then in the garden, even when Peppa took it to the neighbors. Labubu always found its way back. It began appearing in the most unexpected places. In Peppa's school bag, in the refrigerator, even in the bathroom. Each time its smile became wider and its eyes brighter. One night, Peppa woke up and found that all her toys had lined up in a row, looking at the bed. And in the center stood Labubu, like a commander of an army. "Now you understand," whispered a voice that seemed to come from all the toys at once. "I'm not just a toy, I'm a collector. And now you're part of my collection." Peppa wanted to scream but couldn't move. Her body was becoming stiffer, like a toy. She felt her skin turning to plastic and her thoughts slowing down. "Don't worry," said Labubu, coming closer. "Being a toy isn't so bad. You'll play forever. With me." In the morning, Mummy Pig found a new toy in Peppa's room, very similar to her daughter. It stood on the shelf next to Labubu, with the same wide smile and motionless gaze. "Strange, I don't remember buying this toy," Mummy Pig muttered, adjusting the little dress of the toy Peppa, and Labubu stood nearby, its smile even wider. Now it had a friend, forever. But Labubu's collection wasn't complete yet. In the evening, it heard George playing in the next room. It was time to find a new friend, Peppa Pig. The second window. Peppa's room had always had one window. Everyone knew that. Peppa, Mummy Pig, Daddy Pig, even George. From that window, she could see their yard, the swing, the flower bed. Everything was normal. But one morning, Peppa woke up and felt an unusual chill. She yawned, stretched, sat up in bed, and froze. On the other wall, There was a window, a second one. It had never been there before. Peppa jumped out of bed and walked up to it. It was narrower and taller than her usual window. The frame was dark, old, the glass cloudy like it had a layer of dust. Beyond it was a forest. Not their yard, not the street, a forest. Tall grey trees without leaves. A pale sky, mist curling between the trunks. Peppa backed away. She looked through her usual window. There was their yard. George was playing with his dinosaur. Everything as it should be. She turned back to the second window. The forest. Still. But it felt like someone was hiding behind the trees, watching. "Mummy?" she called. Mummy Pig came up the stairs and entered the room. "Yes, Peppa? I have a window." "Of course you have a window," Mummy smiled. "Everything's fine." "No, not that one. Another one. There's a forest." Mummy looked where Peppa pointed. "There's a wall, sweetie," she said. "You probably had a dream. Try to sleep a little more." And she left. Peppa stayed alone. The window was still there. During the day she tried to forget, played with George, drew pictures. But when she returned to her room in the evening, the window had moved lower, almost level with her eyes. The forest was the same, but the mist was thicker, and there was a figure among the trees, black, still. The face was unclear. Peppa pulled the curtain shut, tight, and stayed away. At night, she woke up. The curtain had been pushed aside. A pale light shone from the window, and Peppa saw the figure had moved closer. It was now standing right at the glass. It didn't move, but now she could see the face. It looked like her, just stretched, eyes too wide, a thin, strange smile. Peppa screamed. Mummy ran in. The light came on. The window was gone. "You had another dream, darling," said Mummy. "Everything's all right." But Peppa didn't believe her. The next morning, the window was back, on a different wall. Every day it changed position, sometimes behind the bed, sometimes beside the door. The forest never changed. The figure kept getting closer. Peppa started leaving notes on the windowsill. "Who are you?" she wrote. But in the morning, they'd be gone. And one morning, words had been scratched into the glass from the inside. "You look out the window, but I'm inside." That day, Peppa didn't go to school. She sat in the corner of her room, by her normal window, breathing quietly. From behind her, a rustle. The curtain moved on its own. She didn't turn around. Now, the window is always there. But no one else sees it. Not Mummy, not Daddy. Even George says there's nothing there. And sometimes, at night, it opens.
The Mysterious Shadow. One evening, as Peppa and her family were preparing for dinner, the house started to grow dark faster than usual. Daddy Pig turned on the living room light, but the bulb immediately went out, leaving the room in semi-darkness. Soon, the lights in the whole house started to dim, and Peppa felt that something was wrong. Mummy Pig tried to turn on other lights, but without success. Peppa suggested opening the windows to let in some light, but when they did, there was nothing visible outside. No yard, no familiar trees, just endless darkness. Peppa closed the window, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. Daddy Pig suggested they go outside and see what was happening. But as soon as he opened the door, the entire house was suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Peppa, Mummy, and Daddy stood in the dark hallway, hearing only each other's footsteps and a faint rustling sound. Then Peppa noticed a strange shadow moving across the walls. At first, she thought it was just the play of light, but the shadow became clearer and more unnatural. Peppa tried to call out to her parents, but they didn't respond, their faces empty. The shadow began to move closer, and Peppa felt her heart tighten with fear. She tried to find the light switch, but couldn't remember where it was. At that moment, the shadow appeared right in front of her. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a creature with huge, soulless eyes and a twisted body. Peppa screamed in terror, and at that moment, the light flickered back on. The shadow disappeared, as if it had never been there. But Peppa couldn't forget what she had seen. When she returned to her parents, they seemed just like usual, but something about their behavior was strange. They didn't notice how quickly it had gotten dark, nor were they concerned about the lights going out. Peppa decided she had to stay on guard. And though everything returned to normal, at night in her room, she often saw strange shadows sliding across the walls, sometimes moving as though they were watching her. Peppa Pig. Something is wrong with Peppa. One rainy morning, Peppa woke up earlier than usual. Her room seemed normal, but something felt off. She looked in the mirror and noticed her reflection appeared strange, slightly distorted. Maybe it's just my imagination, she thought, and went down for breakfast. Throughout the day, Peppa noticed her friends acting differently. Susie, usually cheerful, kept her distance and barely spoke to her. During playtime, Susie finally said, "You look strange today." Peppa frowned but didn't reply. Later, while playing in the yard, she caught her reflection in a puddle. Her eyes seemed darker, and her smile was unnervingly wide, almost creepy. She blinked and the reflection looked normal again. By evening, her family started noticing changes in her behavior. Peppa was unusually quiet, no longer laughing, and her occasional smiles seemed unsettling. "Are you feeling okay, dear?" Mummy Pig asked at dinner. "Yes, Mummy," Peppa replied, but her voice sounded lower and stranger than usual. Late that night, George woke up to strange whispers coming from Peppa's room. He tiptoed to her door and peeked inside. She was standing in front of her mirror, whispering something, but her reflection wasn't moving in sync. It seemed alive, moving on its own. "Peppa?" George asked, his voice trembling. She slowly turned toward him, and for a brief moment, her eyes glowed red. "Go back to bed, George," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. The next day, things got even worse. Peppa became aggressive, breaking George's toys and ripping books. She seemed to enjoy it, laughing in a hoarse, chilling tone that made Mummy and Daddy Pig exchange worried glances. Later that night, loud noises came from Peppa's room. Her parents rushed upstairs to find her standing by the window. She didn't move, but her shadow on the wall writhed and twisted as if it had a life of its own. "Peppa, what are you doing?" Mummy Pig asked, her voice shaking. "I'm not Peppa," she said, turning slowly. Her eyes were completely black, and her smile was unnaturally wide. The next morning, the house was empty. No one knew what had happened to Mummy, Daddy, or George. The camera slowly panned to the kitchen, where Peppa sat alone at the table. She smiled, her eyes still dark and empty. Peppa Pig. George is not the same. One morning, Peppa noticed that George was acting strangely. He didn't want to play with his favorite dinosaur as he usually did, and barely spoke. Instead, he sat in the corner of his room, drawing strange patterns on the floor. "George, what are you doing?" Peppa asked. "You'll find out soon," he said quietly, without looking up. His words sent a chill down Peppa's spine. Later that day, Mummy Pig tried to get George to eat, but he refused his favorite food. His eyes looked tired, and he kept whispering something under his breath. "Peppa, is your brother okay?" Mummy Pig asked. I don't know," Peppa replied, feeling uneasy. That night, things got even worse. Peppa woke up to the sound of scratching. Looking around, she saw George standing by the window, staring into the night. Moonlight lit his face, and it seemed unnaturally pale. "George, why aren't you sleeping?" she whispered. He slowly turned his head toward her. His eyes were completely black, and he wore a twisted smile. "I'm not George anymore," he said in a low, raspy voice. Peppa screamed, but George disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, George returned, but he wasn't the same. His skin felt cold. He didn't play, didn't laugh, and didn't respond to questions. Instead, he sat at the table, tapping his fingers in a never-ending rhythm. When Peppa tried to approach him, he turned suddenly and whispered, "You're next." Later, Peppa noticed his favorite toy dinosaur lying on the floor, torn to pieces, and strange symbols had appeared on the wall. They were scratched into the paint, and their shapes resembled eyes watching her. Peppa told her parents, but they dismissed her fears. "Peppa, don't worry. George is just a little tired," Daddy Pig said. But Peppa knew something wasn't right. That night, Peppa woke up again to strange noises. She looked over at George's bed, but it was empty. On the floor, she saw footprints leading downstairs. Peppa followed them and found George in the living room. He was standing in front of the mirror, but his reflection moved differently from him. "George, stop it!" Peppa shouted, but he didn't react. His reflection turned toward her, grinning a sinister smile. "He's not with you anymore," the reflection said. Final scene. The next day, George was gone. He was nowhere to be found, but Peppa discovered a note on his bed. "He's with us now.